Okay, Year 11, so following on from the video on Pevensey Castle and following on from part 1, we're now on to part 2 of the Norman course. So first part of the course was all about the conquest, now part 2 is all about life, daily life in Norman England, and there's a few important things to cover for that, so let's get started. Number one of the big things that you probably will remember is the feudal system. So medieval society in the Anglo-Saxon times and in the Norman times was structured in a hierarchical system. So a hierarchy of different people with different jobs or different roles and going up in order of importance, separating land and loyalty. But the Normans changed and altered the feudal system. It's important to remember the structure of it, the king at the top. We then have the barons and bishops second in the feudal system. Then we have knights, and then at the bottom we have peasants. Quite a simple structure to remember, but what actually happens? In essence, the people in the higher positions, like the king, then pass down land or give land to the people below, the barons and bishops, who in return offer loyalty. That loyalty can be provided through different services, for example, military service. So the idea is, you keep your land as long as you're loyal. It's an effective system of running a country because you know that people will always say, or will usually stay loyal to you because they don't want to lose their income, don't want to lose their land. So what did the Normans do that's maybe a little bit different from the Anglo-Saxons? There's a few important things. What we have to remember is the king was given more direct control in this Norman feudal system. The way he does that is that loyalty being passed up the chain, almost as like you're all swearing loyalty to the king. And you also have the fact that the king, alongside the new system or the new feudal system, passed something called the forest laws. And so as part of the feudal system, the king dedicated certain areas of the land or certain royal forests that people could not poach on or people could not farm on. And actually that was quite hated, but it showed you the king's power. You know, you lose land, you lose your position if you betray those laws. So the king having that more direct control. Below him, the barons and bishops. This is a massive change. So in the Anglo-Saxon system, there was maybe 6 earls in charge of the earldoms. We now have a separation to about 200 barons and bishops. These barons, these bishops, you know, splitting up into smaller chunks and giving smaller bits of land out is really important because it means that William can keep more direct control over the population. Rather than having 6 really powerful earls in charge of a large chunk of England, you've got smaller sections, probably giving the main effect of stopping rebellions. Also the fact that bishops are given such an important position in the feudal system actually shows you the importance of religion, which can help William controlling England. Knights are obviously below that, they get their land from the barons and bishops, I'll talk about them in a minute. And peasants, big things to remember for peasants, they're doing the lowest of low work and they're working for the knights, but there's no more slavery. So the Normans abolish, they get rid of slavery among the peasant classes. That actually has a really important religious point. It goes against Christian teaching, so it could get people on side religiously. In our exam, you're probably, for the feudal system, probably going to need to know about how it affected William's control, how it helped William. And we can split that into certain sections. So I would say it had a political importance for William, so it helped him politically. When we say how does it help him politically, we can see how the fact that he's divided the population, that gives him more political power. He doesn't have to worry about rebellions from a big earl. We also have the fact that it's easier to control because of those smaller chunks. We also have the fact that it gives more status to more people in the country, and he can reward people for their loyalty. He can reward Normans. Again, he can get Normans in important positions, which means he can get greater control. The forest laws goes alongside that as well. That gives him more political power. And religion as well, by giving bishops power, that religious importance of the time means that William can pass a lot of laws or make a lot of changes and say he's got God on side, with the bishops probably supporting him. It also has a military importance as well, when we look at actually the fact that knights are part of this system and having to give loyalty. What is their loyalty? Providing service. And actually there was a slight change from the Normans. Actually barons and bishops, for their land, in return for their land, they had to provide knights, and knights had to give a minimum of 40-day service, guaranteed service for the king. So he knows now that he's got a guaranteed military force at all times. So it has a military effect, this feudal system as well. And we also have an economic effect. This organisation of the system means people want to keep their land, want to make it more profitable. Splitting up smaller bits of land perhaps means they work a bit harder on that land, and it can make a lot of money for the king. So that's the feudal system. Another thing William had to do was he had to make sure he kept control of the borders. So life changed on the borders for some people. On the border of Wales, William sets up a special law or special positions called the Marcher Lords. So along the border with Wales, several important individuals were called Marcher Lords. Those Marcher Lords were able to make their own laws, build their own castles, and were given a lot of autonomy, a lot of their own control. So those Marcher Lords, life on the border of Wales, you were under a lord or a baron who had a lot of power. The same can be said on the border with Scotland. The Bishop of Durham was given similar powers to the Marcher Lords, and they can make some of their own decisions. So that shows you that there was power in certain individuals' hands. How does that change life? I think what we can see is that we can see the importance of there potentially being rebellions on the borders. Then we have one of the other most famous things that William does to affect people's life, the Doomsday Book. You could get a whole question on the Doomsday Book in your exam. Over 13,000 pages of information collected over the course of a year. What were the questions asked? Loads of questions, but basically finding out what possessions people had, what land was owned, what was the value of land that was owned, who could provide military service, finding out about day-to-day lives. Now, this is really important. It has a few effects, and like I said to you earlier about the feudal system and how you can apply it to an exam question, the Doomsday Book could be applied to how does the Doomsday Book help William keep control. We can look at the political effect. The fact that he's got people going around and checking up on you can be a bit of a big brother idea, the idea that you're being watched, the idea that the king knows about you, which definitely increases his power. We also have the fact that any local disputes, any disputes over land or who owns what, can be settled now by this book, and it can keep the law and order within certain areas. We also have the fact that, so that's political, we have the military effect of it, so it can help in a military sense. With the military, we've got the fact that soldiers, you know what soldiers you've got access to, that can provide, if you know there's a battle coming up, a rebellion or potential invasion, you know what knights are provided. And economically, for taxation, you know how much land, what the land is worth, you know who owns what, you can claim more taxes or claim more in tax, which can definitely be an economic benefit for the king. So that's the Doomsday Book. We then also have to look about how William changes the government. So what does he do for the government? In terms of the national government, he makes the king have more power, he extends the king's power. How does he do this? He does this through several ways. He makes sure that his face is on all coins with the crown on, so proving, I am in charge. You know, those local villages that maybe don't get much contact with what's happening around the country, the coins will prove that. We also have ceremonial crown wearings where the king makes sure he wears the crown at big events so everyone knows again his power. And also he changes the rules of inheritance, which is a massive thing. What the old Anglo-Saxon rules have changed. The Normans now make the rules of inheritance. If you die with no heir, your land then passes to the person above you in the feudal system. As the king owned the more land than anybody else, that meant that lots of land was passed into the hands of the king. If not the king, it was usually being passed to a Norman lord, again establishing that control of the Normans. He did carry on using the witan, as I've mentioned in a previous video. Those close around him, they're called the Curia Regis, so he makes sure he keeps in contact with those closest around him. He gets advice. In terms of, despite using that though, he does issue more direct orders. They're called government by writ, and so the king steps up, King William steps up the amount of government by writ, laws that are put in place by the king, dictated for the population. Again, stamping that authority on the population. Local governments, the shire system is kept. The idea of having sheriffs in charge of those shires is still remains. However, a lot of the sheriffs, a lot of the important people in important positions within shires become Normans. So Normans are controlling the most important areas of the country, or controlling the shires. And there's also some new roles set up, like castellans, who protect the royal forests and protect the castles. Law and order. So William's taking charge of the country. Obviously he wants to prevent rebellions, but he wants to make sure that people follow rules and actually behave themselves, and there's not anarchy in the country. So what does he do? We have the court system. The court system stays pretty much the same as the Anglo-Saxons. I'll tell you the one difference in a second. So we have the King's Court, which deals with major crimes like treason. We have the Shire Court, which deals with major crimes within a larger area, but maybe not relevant for the king. So that could be, major thefts or things like that. We then go down to the 100 courts, which is like more minor disputes over like land and things like that. And then we have the Lord's Court. The Lord's Court is a new court under the Normans, which is basically established for land disputes where the Domesday Book can really come into play. And manor courts, everyday issues on the manor, manor house, peasants working around there, day-to-day issues, okay? So they kind of go down in importance, and again that means that the king isn't taking charge of everything, it's all split into different areas, and the Normans are controlling a lot of those courts, so the Normans are establishing their control. We also have how do you catch criminals, or who's used to catch criminals. We have constables, who are people who have got the power to arrest, put people in the stocks. It's their job to try and catch criminals. We've got watchmen who have to enforce curfews. Again, they're responsible, those watchmen are responsible for catching criminals that are known about, but they're not paid, so they don't do a very good job. We have tithings, groups of 10 freemen, groups of 10 men who are responsible for making sure each of them are following laws and orders. So actually what that will be is if one person in your tithing commits a crime and you don't catch them, or you don't attempt to catch them, you will also be punished. So you're keeping people in check. And we also got hue and cry. If you witness a crime, it's your idea to raise the alarm and catch that criminal. Most of these things were still in place from the Anglo-Saxon times, and there wasn't a major change by the Normans. What about trials? So with trials, once somebody's been is on trial for a crime, once they've been caught by maybe a watchman or a tithing, there's just a couple of things to remember. The Normans kept one system, the trial by ordeal. So there was two forms of that, the trial by cold water. So the person accused would be chucked into, let's say, like a local river or a lake or something. If they sank, they were proven to be innocent because the water had accepted them, or God had accepted them in the water. However, if they were rejected, or if they floated, they were seen to be guilty. Okay. We also have the trial by hot iron. So a hot iron put in somebody's hand, they had to walk with it, and then 3 days later, it's bandaged up. 3 days later, if it's healed, then God has healed it. You are innocent. If it's not, you are guilty. That was kept from the Anglo-Saxon times. That focus or that idea of religion was maintained. However, a new trial was trial by battle. So that was where the accused and the accuser would battle themselves, or somebody would represent them, and the winner was seen as the person telling the truth, the innocent person. Now, the whole idea of trial by battle shows you how militaristic the